The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Riverside Music Academy, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Rosa quietly pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, the wheels making a soft squeaking sound that had become familiar to everyone who worked there. She had been cleaning this place for 3 years now, and she knew every corner, every room, and every piano by heart. Rosa was a small woman in her early 40s with gentle brown eyes and graying hair that she always kept neatly pulled back. She wore the standard blue uniform of the cleaning company, with comfortable shoes that had seen better days. Most people who passed her in the hallways barely noticed her presence. She was just part of the background, like the paintings on the walls or the potted plants in the corners, but Rosa didn't mind being invisible. In fact, she preferred it that way. It meant she could listen to the beautiful music that filled the academy all day long without anyone paying attention to her. As she mopped the floors and dusted the furniture, she would hear students practicing scales, teachers giving lessons, and sometimes even small concerts in the main hall. The academy was a fancy place, the kind where wealthy families sent their children to learn proper music. The walls were covered with portraits of famous composers, and every room had expensive instruments that cost more money than Rosa made in a year. The students who came here wore designer clothes and carried expensive bags. Their parents drove luxury cars and spoke in confident voices about their children's bright futures. Rosa had learned to stay out of their way. She would clean the practice rooms early in the morning before the students arrived, or late in the evening after they had gone home. She had her routine down to a science. First, she would clean the smaller practice rooms on the second floor. Then she would work her way down to the main floor, saving the grand piano hall for last. The grand piano hall was Rosa's favorite part of the building. It was a large room with high ceilings and perfect acoustics. In the center sat a magnificent black piano that gleamed under the crystal chandelier. The piano was beautiful, with smooth curves and ivory keys that looked like they had been carved by angels. Rosa had been told it was worth more than most people's houses. Every day, Rosa would clean around that piano very carefully. She would dust the bench, polish the wood, and gently wipe down the keys with a special cloth. She never pressed the keys, but sometimes she would run her fingers just above them, imagining what it would feel like to play such a beautiful instrument. Professor David Whitman was the head piano instructor at the academy. He was a tall man, in his 50s with silver hair and expensive suits. He had studied at the best music schools and had performed in concert halls around the world. Everyone at the academy treated him with great respect, and he expected nothing less. Professor Whitman had a reputation for being strict but fair with his students. He demanded excellence and wouldn't accept anything less. His students either loved him or feared him, but they all respected his knowledge and skill. He had been teaching at the academy for over 15 years and had helped many students get into top music schools. The professor had always been polite to Rosa, but distant. He would nod when he saw her in the hallways and sometimes say good morning, but that was about it. Rosa understood her place in the academy's social order. She was there to clean, and he was there to teach. Their worlds rarely crossed. That all changed on a Tuesday evening in October. Rosa was finishing her cleaning duties for the day, working in the grand piano hall. The building was mostly empty, with just a few students still practicing in the upper floors. Rosa loved this time of day when the academy was quiet and peaceful. She had just finished mopping the floor and was putting away her supplies when she found herself drawn to the beautiful piano. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, making the black surface shine like a mirror. Rosa set down her mop and walked slowly toward the instrument. She had always wondered what it would feel like to touch those keys. Not to play them, just to feel them under her fingers. Rosa looked around to make sure no one was watching, then gently placed her hand on the piano bench. The leather was soft and worn smooth by years of use. Rosa sat down carefully on the bench and looked at the keyboard. The keys seemed to glow in the sunlight, white and black in perfect order. She could almost hear the music they were capable of making. Slowly, very slowly, she reached out her hand and let her fingers hover just above the keys. She didn't press them down. She knew better than that. But she could feel the smoothness of the ivory, the way each key was perfectly positioned. Her fingers moved slightly, as if she was playing a silent song that only she could hear. Rosa was so lost in the moment that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching from behind. She didn't notice the shadow that fell across the piano. She was thinking about music, about melodies and harmonies, about all the beautiful sounds that could come from this incredible instrument. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" The sharp voice cut through Rosa's thoughts like a knife. She jumped up from the bench so quickly that she almost knocked over her cleaning cart. Professor Whitman was standing behind her, his arms crossed and his face stern. "I'm sorry, Professor," Rosa said quickly, her accent making her words sound softer than she intended. "I was just finishing the cleaning." Professor Whitman looked at her with disapproval. His eyes moved from Rosa to the piano and back again. "I saw you sitting at the piano. You know that instrument is not for cleaning staff to touch." Rosa felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. "I wasn't playing it, sir. I was just cleaning around it." "That piano is worth more than most people make in several years," Professor Whitman said, his voice getting colder. "It's a professional instrument, not a toy. I would appreciate it if you would stick to mopping floors and leave the piano to people who understand its value." The words hit Rosa like a physical blow. She had been so careful, so respectful. She hadn't even pressed a single key, but she could see in the professor's eyes that he thought she was just an ignorant cleaning woman who didn't know any better. "Yes, sir," Rosa whispered, unable to look at him. "I understand." She quickly gathered her cleaning supplies, her hands shaking slightly as she put the mop and bucket back on her cart. Professor Whitman watched her every move, making sure she didn't get too close to his precious piano again. As Rosa pushed her cart toward the door, she could feel the professor's eyes on her back. She had never felt so small, so insignificant. The beautiful music that usually filled her heart seemed to fade away, replaced by the echo of his harsh words. Just before she reached the door, Rosa turned back for one last look at the piano. It no longer seemed magical or inviting. Now it looked like a barrier, a symbol of a world that would never accept her. Professor Whitman was still standing there, watching her with those cold, judgmental eyes. Rosa left the grand piano hall that evening with her head down and her heart heavy. She finished her other cleaning duties in silence, trying to push away the memory of the professor's words. But as she walked to her car in the parking lot, she couldn't stop thinking about how it had felt to sit at that piano bench, even for just a moment. What Professor Whitman didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Rosa had been carrying a secret for 3 long years. A secret that would have changed everything if they had bothered to ask. Rosa drove home that evening with Professor Whitman's words still ringing in her ears. "Stick to mopping floors and leave the piano to people who understand its value." She gripped the steering wheel tighter as she thought about how he had looked at her, like she was nothing more than a nuisance who didn't know her place. Her small apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building in the downtown area. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and comfortable. Rosa had worked hard to make it feel like home for herself and her daughter, Carmen, who was now 16 and in her junior year of high school. The walls were decorated with family photos and Carmen's school awards, and there was always the smell of something delicious cooking in the tiny kitchen. Carmen was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when Rosa walked in. She was a bright girl with her mother's gentle eyes but her father's stubborn chin. She looked up when she heard the door close and immediately noticed something was wrong. "Mama, what happened?" Carmen asked in Spanish, setting down her pencil. "You look upset." Rosa forced a smile and switched to English. "Nothing, Mia. Just a long day at work. How was school?" But Carmen wasn't fooled. She had inherited her mother's ability to read people's emotions, even when they were trying to hide them. "Something happened at the academy, didn't it?" Rosa sighed and sat down across from her daughter. She told Carmen about the encounter with Professor Whitman, about how embarrassed she had felt and how small his words had made her feel. Carmen's face grew angry as she listened. "He doesn't know anything about you, Mama. Carmen said fiercely. "He has no idea who you really are." Rosa reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "It doesn't matter, Carmen. He's right about one thing. I'm just the cleaning lady there. That's my job, and I need to remember that." "No, Mama, that's not all you are," Carmen insisted. "Tell me again about Argentina. Tell me about the concerts." Rosa looked at her daughter's earnest face and felt her heart soften. Carmen loved hearing these stories, even though Rosa usually felt too sad to tell them. Tonight, though, maybe she needed to remember too. "I was 22 when I played with the Buenos Aires Symphony Orchestra for the first time," Rosa began, her voice getting softer as the memories came back. "I was so nervous that my hands were shaking, but as soon as I touched the keys, everything else disappeared." She closed her eyes and could almost hear the applause that had followed her performance that night. It had been a Chopin concerto, one of the most difficult pieces in the classical piano repertoire. The audience had given her a standing ovation, and the music critics had called her a rising star in the classical music world. "You were famous, weren't you, Mama?" Carmen asked, even though she knew the answer. "Not famous like a movie star." Rosa laughed. "But yes, people knew my name in the music world. I played in concert halls all over South America. I even got to play in Europe twice, once in Paris and once in Vienna." Rosa had studied at the National University of Music in Buenos Aires, one of the most prestigious music schools in South America. She had been the top student in her class and had won several international piano competitions. By the time she was 25, she was performing regularly with major orchestras and had recorded 2 albums. "Why did you leave it all behind?" Carmen asked quietly. Rosa looked at her daughter and felt the familiar ache in her heart. "Because I wanted something better for you, Mia. The economy in Argentina was getting worse and there wasn't much future there. I wanted you to have opportunities that I never had." The decision to leave Argentina had been the hardest thing Rosa had ever done. She had been at the peak of her career, but she could see that the country was heading toward economic collapse. She wanted Carmen to grow up somewhere with better schools, better opportunities, and a chance at a different kind of life, but leaving had meant giving up everything she had worked for. In Argentina, she was Rosa Delgado, the acclaimed pianist. In America, she was just another immigrant trying to make ends meet. "When we first came here, I thought it would be temporary," Rosa continued. "I thought I could get my credentials recognized and start performing again, but it's not that simple." Rosa had spent months trying to navigate the complicated process of getting her Argentine music degree recognized in the United States. She had filled out countless forms, paid expensive fees, and attended meetings with officials who spoke too fast and used words she didn't understand. Her English wasn't perfect, and the cultural differences made everything harder. She had also tried to find work as a piano teacher, but without American credentials, most music schools wouldn't hire her. The few private students she had found couldn't pay enough to support her and Carmen. Rosa had quickly realized that she needed to find other work while she figured out her next steps. "I took the cleaning job at the academy because I thought it would be temporary," Rosa explained. "I thought maybe if I worked there, I could network with the other teachers, show them what I could do, but it doesn't work that way." The truth was that Rosa had taken the job at the Riverside Music Academy partly because she hoped to be around music again. She thought maybe she could find opportunities there, maybe even fill in as a substitute teacher if someone got sick. But she quickly learned that the social barriers were too high. To everyone there, she was just the cleaning lady, and that's all she would ever be. "But you still play sometimes, don't you?" Carmen asked. "I hear you at night," Rosa nodded. She had an old upright piano in the corner of their living room that she had bought used from a church that was closing down. It wasn't much compared to the grand pianos she used to play, but it was hers. Late at night, after Carmen was asleep and the neighbors couldn't complain about the noise, Rosa would sometimes sit at that piano and remember who she used to be. "It's not the same," Rosa said sadly. "My fingers aren't as fast as they used to." When you don't practice regularly, you lose your technique." "Then why don't you practice more?" Carmen asked. Rosa looked around their small apartment. "Where, Mia?" The neighbors complain if I play too much and I work too many hours to practice during the day. What Rosa didn't tell her daughter was that sometimes late at night when she couldn't sleep, she would drive back to the academy. Her friend Miguel worked as the night security guard there, and he understood her situation because his own wife had been a teacher in Mexico before they immigrated. Miguel would let Rosa into the building after midnight when everyone was gone and the academy was completely empty. She would sit at that beautiful grand piano in the main hall and play for an hour or two, trying to keep her skills sharp and remember who she used to be. At first, her fingers had felt stiff and unfamiliar on the keys. Months of holding mops and scrubbing brushes had made her hands rough and less sensitive. But slowly, gradually, the muscle memory was coming back. The music was still there, buried under years of silence but not forgotten. Rosa would play the pieces she had once performed in concert halls, Chopin's nocturnes, Rachmaninoff's concertos, and her favorite tangos by Astor Piazzolla. In those quiet midnight hours, she wasn't a cleaning lady anymore. She was Rosa Delgado, the pianist, playing for an audience of empty chairs and distant dreams, but she always played softly, always careful not to make too much noise. She couldn't risk losing her job at the academy, even if it broke her heart a little more each day. 3 weeks had passed since Professor Whitman's harsh words, and Rosa had been extra careful to avoid the grand piano hall when any of the teachers were around. She would clean that room very early in the morning or very late at night, making sure she never crossed paths with the professor again. The memory of his cold stare and dismissive tone still made her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but on this particular Thursday evening, Rosa felt different. Her daughter Carmen had gotten accepted into the honor society at school, and Rosa's heart was full of pride and joy. Carmen was going to have all the opportunities that Rosa had dreamed of when they left Argentina. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it was okay that Rosa's own dreams had been put aside. Rosa finished her regular cleaning duties earlier than usual and found herself standing outside the grand piano hall at around 9:30 in the evening. The building was almost completely empty. The last few students had left an hour ago, and most of the teachers were gone too. Through the tall windows, Rosa could see Miguel making his security rounds in the parking lot. Rosa pushed her cart into the hall and began her usual routine. She dusted the chairs, cleaned the mirrors, and polished the wooden floors until they gleamed. But tonight, as she worked around the magnificent piano, she felt something different. Maybe it was Carmen's good news, or maybe it was just the beautiful way the moonlight was streaming through the windows. But Rosa felt a pull toward the instrument that she couldn't ignore. She looked around carefully to make sure she was alone. The hallway outside was dark and quiet. Miguel was still outside doing his rounds, and the security cameras in this room had been broken for weeks. Rosa knew because she had heard the maintenance team talking about it earlier in the week. Slowly, Rosa approached the piano bench. Her heart was beating fast, just like it used to before her concerts in Argentina. She sat down carefully and looked at the keys gleaming in the moonlight. For 3 weeks, she had been thinking about Professor Whitman's words about how he had made her feel so small and worthless. But tonight, she didn't want to think about him at all. Rosa placed her hands on the keys and felt the familiar smoothness of the ivory. It had been almost a week since her last midnight practice session, and her fingers felt eager to move. She started with something simple, just a few scales to warm up her hands. The sound filled the empty hall, rich and pure and beautiful. As her fingers found their rhythm, Rosa felt the stress and sadness of the past few weeks begin to melt away. This was who she really was, not the quiet cleaning woman who scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans. This was Rosa Delgado, the pianist who had once made audiences weep with her music. She moved into a piece by Chopin, one of the nocturnes that had always been her favorite. The melody was sad and sweet at the same time, full of longing and memories. Rosa closed her eyes and let the music flow through her. In her mind, she wasn't in the academy anymore. She was back in Buenos Aires, playing for hundreds of people who understood and appreciated what she was doing. The piece ended, and Rosa sat in silence for a moment, her hands still resting on the keys. She felt more like herself than she had. In years, maybe it was time to be brave again. Maybe it was time to play something that would challenge her, something that would remind her of what she was truly capable of. Rosa took a deep breath and began to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto. No, too, it was one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire, and she hadn't attempted it in over 2 years. But as her fingers found the opening notes, she felt the old confidence returning. This was the same piece she had played when she auditioned for the Buenos Aires Symphony Orchestra all those years ago. The music built slowly, starting soft and gentle, then growing more complex and powerful. Rosa's hands moved across the keys. With increasing speed and precision, she could feel her technique coming back, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought left off. This was what she had been born to do. As the piece reached its climactic moment, Rosa threw herself into the music completely. Her whole body moved with the rhythm, her hands flying across the keys with the kind of passion and skill that comes from years of dedicated practice and natural talent. She wasn't thinking about cleaning supplies or Professor Whitman or anything else. There was only the music, pure and powerful and perfect. The notes echoed through the empty hall, bouncing off the high ceilings and tall windows. Rosa had never played better, not even in her professional concerts. All the pain and frustration of the past 3 years seemed to pour out through her fingertips, transforming into something beautiful and transcendent. She was so lost in the music that she didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway outside. She didn't notice the figure standing in the doorway, watching her with growing amazement. Professor Whitman had returned to the academy to pick up some sheet music he had forgotten, and the sound of piano music had drawn him toward the grand hall. At first, he had assumed it was one of his advanced students practicing without permission. He was prepared to give them a stern lecture about building security and proper practice hours. But as he got closer to the hall, he realized that what he was hearing was far beyond the level of any student at the academy. Professor Whitman stood in the shadowy doorway, completely stunned by what he was witnessing. The woman he had dismissed so harshly 3 weeks ago, the cleaning lady he had told to stick to mopping floors, was playing with a level of artistry that he rarely encountered even among professional musicians. This wasn't just technical skill, though Rosa's technique was flawless. This was pure musical expression, the kind of emotional depth and understanding that couldn't be taught in any classroom. Every note was perfect, but more than that, every note meant something. The music told a story of loss and hope, of dreams deferred but not forgotten. Professor Whitman felt his knees grow weak as he recognized the piece. Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto was notoriously difficult, a piece that challenged even the most accomplished pianists. But Rosa was playing it as if it was as natural as breathing, her hands moving with confident grace across the keys. As the music reached its emotional climax, Professor Whitman saw tears streaming down Rosa's face. But she never missed a note, never faltered in her playing. If anything, the emotion made her performance even more powerful, more moving. The professor felt his own eyes filling with tears as he listened. The final notes of the concerto rang out in the empty hall, lingering in the air like a prayer. Rosa sat motionless at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The music had opened something inside her that had been locked away for too long. For a long moment, the hall was completely silent. Then Rosa became aware of a presence behind her. She turned around slowly, expecting to see Miguel checking on the building. Instead, she saw Professor Whitman standing in the doorway, his face pale with shock and something that looked like shame. Rosa's heart stopped. She had been caught, and now she would surely lose her job. She stood up quickly from the piano bench, wiping the tears from her cheeks and preparing for another humiliating confrontation. "Professor, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice shaking. "I know I shouldn't have. I'll clean up and leave right away." But Professor Whitman didn't respond with anger or harsh words. Instead, he walked slowly into the hall, his eyes never leaving Rosa's face. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and filled with something Rosa had never heard from him before: respect. Professor Whitman walked slowly toward the piano, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. Rosa stood frozen by the piano bench, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She expected him to be angry, to yell at her for using the piano without permission, maybe even to call security and have her arrested for trespassing, but when Professor Whitman finally spoke, his voice was soft and filled with wonder. "How long have you been playing like that?" Rosa blinked, confused by the question. She had expected accusations, not curiosity. I'm sorry, Professor. I know I shouldn't have touched the piano. I was just ... No, Professor Whitman interrupted gently, shaking his head. That's not what I asked. How long have you been playing piano? Rosa looked down at her hands, still trembling from the emotional performance. Since I was 5 years old, she whispered. Professor Whitman stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her face. Where did you learn to play Rachmaninoff like that? That's not something you can just pick up from listening to recordings. Rosa felt tears welling up in her eyes again. The shame and fear were overwhelming, but there was also something else, a tiny spark of the pride she used to feel when people recognized her talent. I studied at the National University of Music in Buenos Aires, she said quietly. The professor's eyebrows shot up in surprise. The National University of Music was one of the most prestigious conservatories in South America. You have a degree from there? Yes, sir. I graduated with honors in 1998. Professor Whitman sat down heavily in one of the chairs near the piano. He looked like someone had just told him that the janitor was actually a famous movie star. And you've been working here as a cleaning lady for 3 years? Rosa nodded, unable to speak. She could see the professor trying to process this information, trying to understand how someone with her obvious talent and training had ended up scrubbing floors at his academy. Tell me your story, Professor Whitman said gently. Please. I need to understand. Rosa hesitated for a moment, then sat back down on the piano bench. She had kept her past hidden for so long that it felt strange to talk about it. But something in the professor's voice made her feel safe, like maybe he would listen without judging her. My name is Rosa Delgado, she began. In Argentina, I was a concert pianist. I played with the Buenos Aires Symphony Orchestra and several other major orchestras throughout South America. Professor Whitman's eyes widened. Rosa Delgado? I know that name. You recorded those Chopin albums in the early 2000s, didn't you? Rosa was shocked that he knew her work. Yes, I recorded 2 albums, but that was a long time ago. I have those recordings, Professor Whitman said, shaking his head in disbelief. I've used them in my classes. Your interpretation of the Chopin nocturnes is extraordinary. For the first time in 3 years, Rosa felt a surge of the old pride. Someone remembered her music? Someone respected her artistry? You really know my recordings? Of course I do. Any serious piano teacher knows your work, but what happened? Why did you stop performing? Rosa took a deep breath and began to tell her story. She told him about the economic crisis in Argentina, about how the music industry there had collapsed, and about her decision to immigrate to the United States with her teenage daughter. I thought it would be temporary, Rosa explained. I thought I could get my credentials recognized here and start performing again. But it's not that simple. Professor Whitman listened intently as Rosa described the bureaucratic nightmare of trying to get her Argentine degree recognized in the United States. She told him about the expensive fees, the complicated paperwork, and the language barriers. That had made everything so much harder. I spent months trying to find work as a piano teacher, Rosa continued. But most places wanted American credentials or wouldn't hire someone whose English wasn't perfect. The few private students I found couldn't pay enough to support my daughter and me. So you took the cleaning job here? Rosa nodded. I needed work, and I thought maybe being around music again would help. Maybe I could make connections, find opportunities. But I realized quickly that nobody here saw me as anything but the cleaning lady. Professor Whitman winced, remembering his harsh words from 3 weeks ago. Rosa, I owe you an enormous apology. What I said to you about sticking to mopping floors. I had no idea who you were. You couldn't have known, Rosa said, though she could hear the hurt still in her own voice. I'm just the woman who cleans your academy. No, you're not, Professor Whitman said firmly. You're one of the most talented pianists I've ever heard. What you just played, that was at the level of international concert artists. Better than most of them, actually. Rosa felt tears streaming down her face again. For 3 years, she had felt invisible, forgotten, like her talent and training meant nothing. Hearing those words from someone who understood music the way Professor Whitman did was overwhelming. I've been practicing late at night, Rosa admitted. Miguel, the security guard, he lets me in sometimes. He understands what it's like to leave your career behind when you come to America. You've been practicing here, in this hall? Yes, sir. Just a few times a week, very quietly. I know I shouldn't have, but I needed to play. I was losing my technique, forgetting who I used to be. Professor Whitman stood up and began pacing around the piano. This is incredible. Rosa, do you realize what an opportunity this is, not just for you, but for the academy? Rosa looked at him in confusion. I don't understand. We need someone like you here, Professor Whitman said, his voice getting more excited. Someone with your level of training and experience. Most of our instructors are good, but they've never performed at your level. You could bring something special to our students. But I'm just the cleaning lady, Rosa said, still unable to believe what she was hearing. Not anymore, Professor Whitman said firmly. If you're willing, I want to help you. I want to help. You get your credentials recognized, find you a position here as an instructor. Rosa felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. 3 weeks ago, this same man had humiliated her, made her feel worthless. Now he was offering her everything she had dreamed of. I don't know what to say, Rosa whispered. Say you'll let me help you, Professor Whitman said. Say you'll give me a chance to make up for how wrong I was about you. Rosa looked around the grand piano hall at the beautiful instrument that had been forbidden to her for so long. She thought about her daughter Carmen, about all the sacrifices she had made, about the dreams she had buried. What would I have to do? Rosa asked. First, you'd need to audition for the board of directors, Professor Whitman explained. They make all the hiring decisions. But after what I just heard, I have no doubt you'll impress them. And you really think they would hire me? Professor Whitman smiled, and for the first time since Rosa had known him, his expression was warm and genuine. Rosa, I think they'd be lucky to have you. The Academy needs someone with your talent, your experience, your passion for music. Rosa felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe her story wasn't over. That maybe she could be Rosa Delgado the pianist again, not just Rosa the cleaning lady. When would this audition be? She asked. I'll call an emergency meeting of the board tomorrow morning, Professor Whitman said. Are you ready to show them what you can do? Rosa looked at the piano, then back at Professor Whitman. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. I'm ready. Rosa barely slept that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with everything that had happened. Every few minutes, she would replay the conversation with Professor Whitman, wondering if it had all been a dream. Could this really be happening? Could she really have a chance to be a pianist again? At 6 a.m, Rosa got up and made coffee with shaking hands. Carmen found her in the kitchen, already dressed and ready for work, even though it was 3 hours earlier than usual. Mama, what's wrong? Carmen asked, immediately noticing her mother's nervous energy. Did something happen? Rosa told her daughter everything, about playing the piano the night before, about Professor Whitman finding her, about the audition that was scheduled for 10 o'clock that morning. Carmen's eyes grew wider and wider as the story unfolded. Mama? This is it, Carmen said, grabbing her mother's hands. This is your chance to show them who you really are. But what if I'm not good enough anymore? Rosa asked, voicing the fear that had been keeping her awake all night. It's been 3 years since I performed for anyone except empty chairs. What if I've lost it? Carmen squeezed her mother's hands tighter. You haven't lost anything, Mama. Last night proved that? Professor Whitman wouldn't have offered this if he didn't believe in you. Rosa arrived at the academy an hour early, her stomach full of butterflies. She had chosen her best dress, a simple black one that she usually saved for church, and had pulled her hair back in the elegant style she used to wear for concerts. She felt like she was putting on an old costume, trying to remember how to be Rosa Delgado, the pianist, instead of Rosa the cleaning lady. Professor Whitman was waiting for her in the main office. He looked nervous too, which somehow made Rosa feel a little better. The board members are already here, he told her. There are 5 of them, plus the academy director. They're all very curious to meet you. What did you tell them? Rosa asked. Just that we have a hidden talent working here, and that they need to hear you play. Professor Whitman paused. Rosa, I need you to know something. These people can be intimidating. They're used to judging students, not hiring faculty, but don't let that throw you off. Just play like you did last night, Rosa nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. What should I play for them? Whatever feels right to you, Professor Whitman said. Show them who you are. The board members were seated in the front row of the grand piano hall when Rosa walked in. They looked exactly like what Rosa had expected, well-dressed, serious. People who probably came from wealthy families and had never had to worry about paying bills or finding work. The academy director, Mrs. Patterson, was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who had been running the school for over 20 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Whitman announced, I'd like you to meet Rosa Delgado. Rosa saw a few puzzled looks exchanged among the board members. One of them, a man in an expensive suit, leaned over to whisper something to the person next to him. Rosa caught the word cleaning and felt her cheeks burn. Mrs. Patterson stood up and approached Rosa with a polite but skeptical smile. Miss Delgado, Professor Whitman tells us you have some musical background. Could you tell us a bit about your experience? Rosa took a deep breath and found her voice. I studied piano at the National University of Music in Buenos Aires. I performed with several symphony orchestras in South America and recorded 2 albums of classical music. The room fell silent. Rosa could see the board members looking at each other with confusion and surprise. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. I see, and you're currently employed here as part of the custodial staff, Rosa said quietly, feeling the familiar shame creeping in. Another board member, an elderly woman with perfectly styled silver hair, spoke up. Miss Delgado, forgive me, but this is quite unusual. If you have this background, why are you working as a janitor? Rosa had prepared for this question, but it still hurt to answer. She explained about immigrating from Argentina, about the difficulties with credential recognition, about needing to support her daughter. The board members listened politely, but Rosa could see the doubt in their eyes. Well, Mrs. Patterson said finally, Professor Whitman seems to think very highly of your abilities. Would you mind playing something for us? Rosa walked to the piano on unsteady legs. This was her one chance to prove that she was more than just the woman who cleaned their floors. She sat down at the bench and placed her hands on the keys, the same keys that Professor Whitman had once forbidden her to touch. For a moment, Rosa's mind went completely blank. She couldn't remember a single piece of music. The board members was staring at her, waiting, probably expecting her to fail. Then she closed her eyes and thought about Carmen, about all the sacrifices they had both made, about the dreams that had brought them to this country. Rosa began to play a tango by Astor Piazzolla, a piece that told the story of her homeland, of passion and loss and hope. Her fingers found their way across the keys as if they had a mind of their own. The music filled the hall with warmth and emotion, speaking in a language that needed no translation. As she played, Rosa forgot about the board members, forgot about her fears, forgot about everything except the music flowing through her. This was who she was, who she had always been. The notes danced and swirled around the room, painting pictures of Buenos Aires sunsets and dreams of a better future. When the piece ended, the hall was completely silent. Rosa opened her eyes and saw the board members staring at her. With expressions of absolute amazement, Mrs. Patterson's mouth was slightly open, and the man in the expensive suit had tears in his eyes. My goodness, whispered the elderly woman. with silver hair. That was extraordinary. Rosa stood up from the piano bench, her heart still racing. She had given everything she had to that performance, and now all she could do was wait for their decision. Mrs. Patterson was the first to recover her composure. Miss Delgado, I owe you an apology. When Professor Whitman told us about this audition, I'll admit I was skeptical. But what we just heard, that was the work of a true artist? You mentioned recordings, another board member said. Are they available here in the United States? Yes, Professor Whitman interjected. I have her albums. Rosa Delgado is actually quite well known in classical music circles. Rosa watched as several board members pulled out their phones, presumably to search for her recordings online. Their faces showed growing amazement as they realized that the woman they had thought was just a janitor was actually an accomplished professional musician. Miss Delgado, Mrs. Patterson said, would you be interested in joining our faculty as a piano instructor? Rosa felt the world spin around her. You mean, you're offering me a job as a teacher? Not just any teaching position, Mrs. Patterson continued. We'd like to offer you a senior instructor role with the opportunity to work with our most advanced students. Your salary would be competitive with our other senior faculty members. Rosa couldn't speak. After 3 years of emptying trash cans and mopping floors, after being invisible and dismissed, she was being offered everything she had dreamed of. There's one condition, Mrs. Patterson added with a smile. You'll need to give us 2 weeks. Notice from your current position? We'll need time to find a replacement for our custodial staff. The board members laughed, and for the first time, Rosa laughed with them. I think I can manage that, she said. As Rosa walked out of the academy that morning, she felt like she was floating. She thought about calling Carmen immediately, then decided to wait until she got home, so she could see her daughter's face when she shared the news. Professor Whitman walked her to the parking lot. Rosa, I want to apologize again for what I said to you that day. I learned something important from this experience. What's that? Rosa asked. That talent and passion can be found anywhere, in anyone. I promise I'll never make assumptions about people based on their job title again. Rosa smiled and shook his hand. Thank you, Professor, for giving me a second chance. As she drove home, Rosa thought about how much her life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday she was invisible. Today she was Rosa Delgado, piano instructor at the prestigious Riverside Music Academy. Tomorrow she would begin teaching. Again, sharing her love of music with a new generation of students. The dreams she had carried from Argentina were finally coming true, and Rosa had never felt more grateful to be alive.